Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Lynn O'Hara, and I'm the Director of Programs for National History Day. We're excited to be joining you for our next installment of the Ask an NEH Expert series. In this series, we talk about specific skills that NHD students are working on that also are used by professionals who work in the field of history. So today we're going to be talking about historical significance. Now, this series is brought to you by the National Endowment for the Humanities, who's a key partner with National History Day. So to get things started and introduce our expert, I'm going to turn things over to Jason Harshman, my colleague at the NEH. Thank you for joining us, Jason.
Thank you, Lynn. Hello, and thank to all of you for being with us for this video series. I'm Jason Harshman, a program officer in the Division of Education at the National Endowment for the Humanities. Since the 1970s, the NEH has been a leading funder and partner with National History Day, including the development of free resources available at our K-12 website and Incitement. Each year, the NEH awards a special prize for working with the historical newspaper database chronicling America and top projects with an NEH NHD Scholar Medal. It is our pleasure to once again partner with National History Day on the production of this Ask an NEH Expert video series and to welcome Shatavia Elder. Shatavia is the Vice President of Education at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Ms. Elder received her Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from the University of West Georgia and her Master of Education from Nova Southeastern University. Before joining the Atlanta History Center, Ms. Elder served as a public school educator and leader of professional learning, and she has been honored for that work as the Outstanding Georgia Citizen and District-Wide Teacher of the Year. The Atlanta History Center was awarded a CARES Act grant by the National Endowment for the Humanities to develop digital resources and expand access to those resources for schools and the public. Thank you, Shatavia, for being with us for this video on historical significance.
Welcome. We are so thrilled to have you join us, and I love that you're a former classroom teacher because I know we've got lots of teachers in our audience who will be watching this alongside their students. So we're going to talk today on this question about historical significance. We talk about that, it's in the NHD evaluation form, but can you kind of help us out with a definition? What is historical significance for our students who are listening?
Absolutely, Lynn. So by definition, historical significance refers to the impact or consequences of the topic. When you consider the person, place, or event or moment in history, you sort of assess to see the impact that it's had on society over a period of time. And so you ask, the main question is, so what? Why does this even matter? Why does this topic matter to us? Why do we care? And historical significance, by asking those questions, it should be able to lead you to that answer. You're also going to think about the impact or consequences of the outcome. I think it's also important to note that it's not current events, although there may be something within current events that intrigues students to want to dig around a bit, but I would challenge them to trace it back a little bit more because chances are if there's something that's compelling that's going on now, it's probably happened in history. So there's opportunities to be able to find that historical significance within that content.
I think many of our students are inspired by current events, and our teachers are really good at helping them kind of trace back to the roots or to similar events that have happened in the past. But okay,
Right.
I want to come back to this idea of short-term and long-term, either consequences or impacts of historical events. Can you explain the difference between the two? And can you explain a little bit about why we need to consider both when we're studying history?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to study both in order to really see the true impact that the particular topic has had in history over a period of time. So when you think about short-term consequences, one of the first things, you're looking for the consequences or impacts that may have happened immediately. So what were those things? Or what was the reaction that took place right when the event happened? Maybe weeks, months later down the line. And some questions that I think it's important to be able to arrive to the short-term consequences is, number one, what were the immediate impacts? What was the reaction to this particular topic? And also, what happened a short time after the event or process? And if you ask yourself those particular questions, chances are it will lead you to discover a little bit more about the short-term effects or the short-term impacts or consequences. Now, on the other side, the long-term consequences, or impacts, you're looking to see what happened or what occurred over a period of time, looking at years, decades, centuries, for example. And questions that will help students to really get to that point is, how will this impact future history? Why is this significant in history? Why should we care? What changes happened as a result? So by starting with those questions, it should really lead them to be able to trace back a little bit more to see the parallels between the short term as well as the long term consequences or impacts.
I think that's really important because even though students, like you mentioned, are really excited by current events, things that are going on right now, the truth is we don't know the long-term effects. We might know some short-term effects. We probably don't know all of them. And I think it's good to kind of have that stem in your brain of saying, hey, because of this, whether it's an event or a law or a case or a person, because of this person, why do they matter? How did they impact the world around them? And how do we feel their impact 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000 years later? And I think when we can see that, that really helps us get at the so what. And I think that's an area where our students struggle. Let me do a follow-up here. When you're looking at short-term consequences, what kind of questions do you ask yourself when you're the researcher?
So when you're looking at short-term questions, I think asking yourself, what were the immediate impacts? What happened just a short time after the event? And then also, what was the reaction to this topic? And that should help you analyze a little bit deeper in terms of some of the short-term impacts.
Okay, and then let me ask you the same question with long-term impacts. What kind of questions do you need to ask yourself?
For long-term impacts or consequences, I would simply ask, how does this impact future history? Because you're thinking long-term over a period of time. Why is this significant in history now? Why should we care? And those types of questions allow you the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper and see those trends, or to be able to trace back events and how it has had an impact or on society over a period of time.
Can you give us some examples that would help us explain, or give us some concrete examples of looking at events in history with their short-term and long-term consequences?
Yeah, for the purposes of today, I will use voter suppression as a topic. Voter suppression, particularly in the South, because I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia. And so, right after the Reconstruction period was the evolution or the uprising of the Jim Crow laws. And so, with the Jim Crow laws, it was this time where basically there were laws that were in place to limit the rights of Black American citizens. And one way that they did that was through voter suppression. And so there are different types. You have literacy tests, you also have poll taxes, grandfather clauses, voter purge, okay? But for the purposes of today, I'll talk about literacy tests as an example to show the parallels between short-term and long-term impacts, okay? So literacy tests were initially used for African Americans when it was time for them to vote, but they had to they showed the voters a portion of the Constitution and asked for them to interpret it. The problem is this particular test wasn't standardized. It didn't have like a rubric that you would typically see in classes today. It was very subjective, and the pass or fail would be at the hands of the person, that the test administrator. So a lot of times people were not allowed to vote. So when you think about the literacy test and the short-term impacts that it had on Black Americans during this particular time, one, they were not able to vote. A lot of African Americans did not have their rights to vote. And so if you could not vote, then obviously you couldn't change the political scene that you see, and therefore your communities would typically stay the same. That would be an example of short-term impacts. Again, going back to those questions that we talked about before, like what were some of the things that happened immediately? Immediately, African Americans did not have the opportunities to vote, or there were decreased opportunities to vote. So when you think about long-term over a period of time, although Jim Crow happened as early as 1877, it still took until 1965 when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voters' Rights Act in 1965, which was basically an opportunity to remove those barriers for Black people to vote. And so that was something that happened over a period of time. It took a long time, several years, and then as a result of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Black Americans then had a legal standing to now justify their opportunities to vote and to eliminate the literacy test and all of the other sorts of voter suppression. Unfortunately, it still goes on today, but that's one particular example.
Is there another example that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. So I also mentioned voter purge is one of those voter suppression topics. And so voter purge is something that's sort of essential because what election administrations would do is typically they go through their rosters and say, okay, well, this person has, is deceased, we'll clean out these names and things like that. So it's a system that is in place and it is needed. Unfortunately, when you voter purge or when you purge names from your list, it should look pretty fair. However, there was not a fair system in place. And so in Georgia, we had the controversy or the three governors controversy. This was in the 1940s. And during this time, they took away several names from the poor communities and also from African Americans. Their names were eliminated from the opportunity to from the roster to vote. And so some of those immediate impacts was that people could not vote in their general primaries. They couldn't vote. So again, if you cannot vote in your general primaries, you can't change your communities, you can't vote for the mayors, you can't vote for those people that are really helping things to go within your cities. So that impacts your school boards, that impacts your tax commissioners, like all of those things that you wouldn't think of, they have been impacted as a result of, and that's your short-term effects or short-term, consequences or impacts. Now, when you think about voter purging and what it looks like, years later, 2018 here in Georgia, there was another voting purge that happened here in Georgia. And during that time, over 70% of the names that were purged were those of African American names. And so as a result of that, it truly impacted our governor election again here in Georgia in 2018. Now, one of the long-term effects of that is that obviously there were a lot of people that had been registered to vote that were no longer able to vote. That was a short-term impact. But then when you think about long-standing or over a period of time, it also had an impact on this presidential election. There was a group of activists that was able to register over 800 new voters here in the state of Georgia. And so when you think about short-term and long-term effects or short-term and long-term impacts or consequences of voting purge, and it was something that happened in the 1940s, but it also continued even to 2018, 2020.
I love how you give examples of helping our students see how there's national trends, but how they really can have a huge impact on the history of a state or even a city or community. I think those are great examples for our students to think about when they're thinking about projects moving forward. Conclusions are hard. They're really hard to write. And when History Day students are doing their projects, they either have a word limit or they have a time limit. And sometimes the conclusion kind of either gets shortchanged or maybe even left off. And so I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about the conclusion of a project and explain why this stage is so crucial to a research project.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that as a teacher. Like once you get to the conclusion, even as a student, I was just like, I'm done with it. I'm over it. But it's so important. You're absolutely right to really draw in the conclusion. I always tell students that you start with the end in mind when you're actually writing your paper. So that should help you initially. But the importance of it is really just to wrap up everything and to really restate the argument that you were intending to state it initially. Also, it helps students to really synthesize or truncate the significance of what it is that you're talking about. You're reinforcing the importance of why this event is so important in history. So it's just an opportunity to restate everything that's going on, wrap up the argument, tie it, put it on a bow, put it in a bow, and just really be concrete with the argument that you were trying to make in the paper.
And when you do that, how does that enhance an argument? How does that kind of, like, I like that idea of tying the bow. What is it? Because sometimes, I've seen really good student projects and I get to the end and I'm just like, oh, you were so close. And, how is it that it helps us understand why we should, obviously, students who get into a research project, they care about their topic, right? They care about the person or event that they're studying. How does a good conclusion wrap a good argument?
Restating the argument, but then also bringing in the primary and secondary sources. So making sure that everything is evidence based, and you're really using history, the evidence that you have to support it, everything to connect the pieces.
Absolutely. That's a great place too for our students to kind of bring in their student voice. I
Yes.
always encourage our students, like, don't let a historian wrap it up for you. Sometimes they do that and they'll be like, oh, this great historian said this and here's a paragraph. And it's like, well, that's great because that's what that historian thinks. But I want to hear what you think. In the end, why does this matter? What's your conclusion in history?
Yes, I agree.
Well, I think these are some really good tips to get students going here. And I appreciate the time that you've put in to helping our students and teachers understand this really key piece of the NHD evaluation form. And what I'm going to do at this point is turn things back to Jason at the NEH.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Shatavia. I really like that point you're making there about these short and long-term evaluations. It helps us to think beyond just the event. And when we do this evaluation as this change over time, that means we need to look at the process, the decision making along the way, because those, what might be seem as smaller decisions, really are going to inform how these larger events, those that we end up having major debates about, come to be. And so I really like that point that you raised. I think that's really helpful in thinking about, yes, if we're seeing it now, it's quite likely we've seen it before. So what did we miss? What did, good or bad, what did we miss or what did we gain along the way? So thank you, Shatavia, and thank you to the Atlanta History Center for the resources that you have created. On behalf of the National Endowment for the Humanities, I want to thank you very much and wish you all the best on your National History Day lessons.